Hi guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Susie and today we're doing another episode of knowledge sharing. Knowledge sharing on my channel are a series of videos that go over a few basic tips about baking to help you along your baking journey. Today is all about flour. If you've ever wondered what is flour or what is the difference between the different types of flours or what is enriched flour or bleached flour, I'm going to answer all those questions today. So the first thing is, what is flour? So flour is basically the powder formed when grain from wheat is milled. And wheat is a type of grass that is grown just for the consumption of its grains, which we mill or grind into powder to form flour. The wheat grain has three different parts, and I want you guys to pay attention to this because I'm going to refer to this in a little bit. So there's three parts of the grain. We have the endosperm, which contains protein and starch. We have the germ, which contains protein, fat, and starch. And the last but not the least is the bran, which contains fiber. The different types of flour we have mostly depends on the type of wheat that was used. And generally, wheat is categorized into soft wheat, which means it has a lower protein or gluten content, or you have hard wheat, which has more protein or more gluten. The type of flour will also depend on which parts of the wheat grain was milled. So here's a fun fact. So wheat is grown all over the world, and wheat grown in the US and Canada generally has a higher protein content compared to the same wheat that is grown in Europe. Isn't that interesting? The three most common type of flour are all-purpose flour, bread flour, and wheat flour. Remember I told you to keep in mind the three different parts of the wheat grain. So all-purpose flour is milled from only the endosperm. So this means it only contains protein and starch. And all-purpose flour is milled from both soft and wheat grain to help give you a lower protein content. And typically we use all-purpose flour. Actually, all-purpose flour is the most commonly used flour, and we can use it to make almost anything. Breads and cookies and quick breads and pies, just almost everything. But typically we use all-purpose flour for breads or baked goods that we want to be tender and not as chewy. Which brings me to bread flour. Bread flour as well is milled from only the endosperm, which means it mostly contains protein and starch. Bread flour is milled from hard wheat, which means it has a higher protein content. So typically we use bread flour for yeasted breads, like one of my favorite breads, tangzang bread, or donuts, or anything that we want to have like layers or very chewy. Because of that strong or high protein content, we would pick bread flour. To make whole wheat flour, the entire wheat grain is milled. The endosperm, the germ, and the bran are milled and mixed together. Whole wheat flour is also milled from hard wheat, which means whole wheat flour also has a higher protein content, just like bread flour. Typically, we use whole wheat flour to substitute all-purpose flour or bread flour, and usually this is substituted in parts. So let's say you have a recipe which calls for 4 cups of bread flour and you want to use some whole wheat flour, you would typically substitute maybe about 50% or less. Compared to the three flours, whole wheat flour is the most nutritious because it still has a germ, which has some vitamins, and it has a bran, which also contains fiber. Here's another fun fact. Other countries have different names for different types of flours. For example, in the US, we have bread flour, and the same flour is called strong white bread flour in the UK. Cake flour is another type of flour, and this is finely milled from soft wheat, and it has a very low protein content, which makes it awesome to make cakes and cookies. We also have self-rising flour, which is basically white flour with some baking soda and salt. So if you want to save some money and make yours at home, you would need 100 grams of flour plus 3 grams of baking powder plus 1 gram of salt. And salt rising flour is great for quick breads and pancake. We also have durum flour, which is made from durum wheat, and this is really great for pizza and pasta. We also have graham flour, which is made from graham wheat, and this is what is used to make graham cookies. And there's also spelt flour, which is milled from spelt wheat. If you've ever been in the grocery store and you saw enriched flour, this means this is all-purpose flour or bread flour with added nutrients. And if you've seen bleached flour, this is white flour which has been treated with oxidizing agents. The most commonly used oxidizing agents are benzoyl peroxide, nitrogen dioxide, and chlorine. Bleached flour is preferred for cookies and quick breads because of its low protein content. Another fun fact is the UK banned flour companies from treating or bleaching flour with benzoyl peroxide, and this ban has been in effect since 1997, but it's still used in the US. We've talked a lot about the different flours, and one thing they had in common is the amount of protein / gluten they have. A lot of people now have gluten intolerance, so this means if they eat breads or any baked goods that contain gluten, they tend to have an allergic reaction. Luckily, we now have gluten-free flour, so people with gluten sensitivities can still enjoy all of the baked goods that we all love. Typically, gluten-free flour is made from milling nuts, starches, or gluten-free wheat. Some of the most popular: almond flour, coconut flour, cassava flour, tapioca starch, or corn flour. It can get really tricky when trying to substitute bread or all-purpose flour. Everything I'm going to tell you about substituting gluten-free flour I learned from doing research, and I haven't really tried this myself, so take this with a grain of salt. But I read that you can substitute almond flour with bread flour 1-to-1, and honestly I'm skeptical about this, but I haven't tried it yet, so I can't tell you if it works or not. Buckwheat flour is another flour you can use to substitute, which is gluten-free, and typically you would substitute about 25% of the flour. I also found this gluten-free flour at my local Costco, so if you want me to test it out and see if I get similar results when making bread, please let me know. I hope you guys found this video helpful, and I hope you learned something new today. If there's anything I said that you don't agree with, leave a comment below and let's have a discussion. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye guys!